Today I'm going to be talking about the best books for new filmmakers. And books are one of the best ways to learn information thoroughly and fast. In the 9 years of filmmaking, I've read a lot of books on filmmaking, and today I'm going to be showing you some of the books that helped me the most, from screenwriting to producing to just the idea of art in itself. So the book that changed how I saw art the most was a book called The Creative Act. This book is very philosophical in the way it talks about what it means to create art, what it means to be creative, and it kind of opened my eyes to see that art isn't just something you make, it's bigger than that, it's bigger than the self. And it talks about like inspiration, talks about the process, and it's very, very helpful. Some of my favorite quotes from this book are, "The reason to make art is to innovate and self-express, show something new, share what's inside, and communicate your singular perspective." So this kind of talks about, what it means to create something that is original to you. And another quote is, "The creative energy exists in the journey of making, not in the act of constructing." And this is what it's saying is, your whole life, you are in the process of making art. Based on the way you live, the way you observe things, it's not just the act of shooting a film that is creating this film, right? Your whole life, you're creating this film. So it kind of really teaches you to be more observant and more present in life, to be inspired. And speaking of inspiration, it's saying to be inspired by the hints the universe drops on you instead of by other people. And what it's saying is things that when you think about, you just get very excited. Those are the things to make movies about, not just random things you see that are trendy. Another quote is, "The best artists tend to be the ones with the most sensitive antenna to draw in the energy resonating at a particular moment." A huge thing with that is listening. So it says, "Listening without prejudice is how we grow and learn as people. More often than not, there are no right answers, just different perspectives. The more perspectives we can learn to see, the greater our understanding becomes." In terms of priority, the inspiration comes first, you come next, the audience comes last. Another huge thing this book talks about is when you're making a movie, you're making it's almost like a diary entry of you and your perspective at that time, right? So when you take a lot of time on post-production and take forever to finish a film, you kind of lose that diary entry essentially, because you're like, why are you writing a diary entry for years, right? It kind of motivated me to finish my films, and it motivated me to be more observant in everyday life. The next book I want to talk about is this Parasite storyboard book. And essentially, it's a book that storyboards the whole film Parasite, in each shot by each shot. You can see the different camera movements, you can see just a ton of really cool stuff in here, and you get into the mind of Bong Joon-ho, right? Seeing how he places the camera, how he transitions from one shot to the next shot, from one scene to the next scene. And I think this is really important to be a director, is because you want that visual cinematic language, right? So I think it's important to kind of learn from other people's storyboards. And not just Parasite. I just chose Parasite because I love this movie. It's one of my favorite movies. But there's tons of other storyboards out there. I think it's going to be very useful for you as a visual storyteller to learn. Next are these master shot books. There are more editions than just these two. But these books are great because it teaches you the camera movements, it teaches you camera placements, what camera move evokes what feeling, and essentially that's what it all comes down to. It's invoking emotion in the audience, right? So when you learn these different techniques, what the different placements, like what lens to use, how fast you want to move it, how do you want to angle the actors, I think this is very useful. And a lot of directors, they read this book right before they go on set to get a lot of inspiration, and I think this is very useful stuff. It teaches you how to shoot a car scene, how to shoot intimate scenes, how to shoot dialogue scenes. It's very good, it's very helpful. So not every book I read is a physical copy. I read a lot of books on my Kindle. It helps me highlight things. This is actually one of my favorite ways to read a book, is just being able to highlight different sections in the book. And my favorite directing book, I think, it's a directing book called Directing Actors by Judith Weston. And this book kind of changed my whole approach to directing. This is very eye-opening stuff, and the stuff this book talks about, our professors at USC Film School also talks about as well. A lot of the stuff they teach is based on this book. The techniques in this book is used by some of the best directors in the world. So one of the biggest things I learned is that your goal as a director is make your actor lose themselves in their co-star. make them not think about who they are themselves, but to think about themselves as the character, right? So a way to do that is creating these environments where they feel like they can have the freedom to collaborate. A lot of directors, they like to give these notes where it's like, you want to be more mad here, and then basically you want to say this line this way, and that's kind of not the way this book teaches directing. It kind of tells you to be exploring with the actor itself, right? To be spontaneous, right? Sometimes the director might not know the best way a scene should be played out. There's better ways that you and the actor can explore. So then when you know that there is no right way of directing a scene, you kind of go in with an approach where you're more adventurous, right? And there is no right or wrong. When you can communicate with that actor, the actor feels more liberated, that they can do more things to find this character, right? And it talks about how to break down scenes. It talks a lot about rehearsing, about casting, and talks a lot about like working a scene, you know, understanding the character's motivation. And it's very, very good stuff, and this is the book I honestly recommend directors the most. The next two books are screenwriting books, Save the Cat and Story by Robert McKee. And these books are very, very helpful when it comes to screenwriting. It teaches a lot about genres. It talks about the way to structure feature films and structure stories. It talks about characters and their beliefs and their wants and needs. And it breaks down a lot of pre-existing works. I think I've learned a lot from these books in my earlier days of screenwriting. Before you can break all these conventions and go crazy with the way you write stuff, I think it's important to start off knowing what is the way of writing a story, you know. And like Save the Cat, it gives a lot of practical writing advice as well. It talks about how to write a sellable logline, talks about how to get agents, it talks about writing habits, and it talks about the different structures, and it talks about what goes in what structure. And then in this book, it talks a lot about how to write characters, their dialogue, what subtext, it talks about endings, talks about how you can twist, it talks a lot about flashbacks and montages, different motivation for the scenes, it talks a lot about like the visual language in a screenplay. Yeah, both these books I really highly recommend as screenwriters. The next book I want to talk about is more practical. It's called Set Life. This book breaks down the roles on a film set, and it talks a lot about the etiquette of being on set, a lot of lingo that they use on set in Hollywood. And it's very much a book about like careers as well. It talks about how different roles in post-production, different roles in grip, different roles with every lighting. It talks about how to get these jobs and how to keep it on set, and I think it's very practical advice in this book, and I highly recommend it. The next book, it's a book about the history of film. It is a short story film and talks about the different film movements and talks about a lot of the films in each film movement. It talks about international movies. So if you want to expand your film knowledge, I think that's so important as a filmmaker, then it is to read this book and watch the movies that they talk about in different chapters. There's a lot of French stuff, a lot of European and like Asian stuff from all over the world, and I think it's quite important to have a good knowledge of film. Obviously, without money, you can't have a film. So this book, it's the Producer's Business Handbook, and this talks about the industry, how distribution works, marketing, development, financing, all of that. And it goes very in depth, talks about partnerships, contracts. Basically everything you need to know about the business side of things is in this book. And also, besides books, I think another thing very helpful is reading like newsletters and stuff. I read this newsletter called The Dailies. It talks about basically everything that's happening in the industry. I think that's quite important to know, like what's selling and what's, you know, being made right now. The next book is In the Blink of an Eye. It's by the editor of The Godfather. And this is a very good book on editing. I think it teaches a lot of practical editing advice, but mostly it talks about the deep like philosophical side of what it means to be an editor, what it means to have a cut, and it gives a lot of good advice, and it talks about the state of the industry, which to be honest I don't think it was that useful because it's so different from, you know, when this book came out and now, but it's still a very interesting read and very helpful if you want to get better at editing. But also some other stuff that I think is very important to read is a lot about history, a lot about how the world works. You know, if you want to make a period piece, you gotta know. And I think filmmaking is all about just knowing everything. Also, I think it's important to read on philosophy, getting ideas about how people think, different viewpoints of how life should be lived. I think that's huge when it comes to writing scripts. Psychology, knowing how characters think, what motivates them, what makes them do certain things. And I think reading the news, knowing the current events that are happening, knowing what people are liking, I think that's also very important when it comes to filmmaking. So I hope you guys go out and check out some of these books, and I hope these books can bring you as much benefit as it brought me. But if you want to know more about how to really be a better film director, then check out this video right here, and I'll see you guys there. Peace out.